Power is no longer this weight, as he said, pressing down from above. It works through all of us like a grid, and the way that it works is through discourses, the ways things are spoken about. Not necessarily the words we use, but yes, the words we use, but the ways that we consider it acceptable to talk about a thing. So a medical discourse, for example, would be kind of doctor speak. Doctors talk about things in certain ways. Those are medical discourses. They write about things in certain ways. Those are medical discourses. And so the ways that it's considered acceptable to talk about certain topics became the locus of power. The dominant discourses were the conveyors of power, and it works through everybody. Everybody's a participant. And so now we have this idea that society is ordered by a conspiracy theory where everybody is an unwitting conspirator. And if you don't understand that this is how they think, that you don't understand that this is what systemic power means, you can't understand the shift from racism to systemic racism that we're facing today. Okay, so everybody's participating in this all the time by the ways that we think, by the ways that we structure our language, by the ways that we interact, by the ways that we consider interactions to be legitimate and illegitimate. Foucault was very concerned with the central idea of expanding the potentialities of being. I love that phrase. Expanding the potentialities of being. And when you do have a genuinely repressive system, you do want to expand the potentialities of being. When you have an oppressive church, you do want to open that up. For example, when you have an oppressive church saying, no, we're not going to do science, we're going to accept this dogma in place, and you're going to put Galileo in house arrest, we're going to set Giordano Bruno on fire for discovering that the stars, or positing that the stars and the sun are the same kind of thing, and refusing to recant. You definitely want to expand some of your potentialities of being a little bit, right? However, there's a limit, which is called reality. Reality has a very important definition, which is it is the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. Okay, so if you expand your potentialities of being beyond the ranges of reality, whether those are the realities of physics or whether those are the realities of human interaction and the principles that lead to true human flourishing, you start running reliably into problems. And this is, whether his analysis falls on the positive or negative valence of history, is what Michel Foucault unleashed into the world, that we need to expand beyond the correspondence theory of truth, because truth doesn't exist. Truth is inaccessible. That's the postmodern belief. Nobody can claim truth. Nobody is objective. We're all subject to our biases, and our biases are located in the cultures in which we find ourselves. Everything's a cultural artifact. Postmodernism and critical theory both kind of wore themselves out. Through the 60s, they rose, through the 70s, they rose, and then through the 80s, they declined. Postmodernism is a bit silly. It's a bit difficult to buy into. At the end of the day, reality's still out there. It's still the thing you run into when your beliefs are false. We're not going to expand our potentialities of being that far. Deconstruction has its limits, at least in terms of fruitful activism. Critical theory became just kind of annoying. In the post-war period following Herbert Marcuse, wrote One-Dimensional Man in 1964, and in One-Dimensional Man he explained that they need a coalition built out of the liberal intelligentsia together with the racial minorities and the societal outsiders. That's who was going to push critical theory forward. And so you ended up with this vein of very radical activists who brought riots to our streets, much like we're seeing now. 1964 is when this comes out, repressive tolerance, that we should not tolerate ideas that are against that normative vision of critical theory. That's 1965. 1967, Detroit's on fire. 1968, more riots. By the 70s, people are getting tired of this. Critical theory started to burn itself out. Even the academic stuff, people just kind of rolled their eyes and got sick of it by the time we got to the 1980s, going into the early 1990s. But a handful of activists, many of whom learned directly from not Marcuse himself, but one of his students, Angela Davis, who's very active with Black Lives Matter today. Many of these people realized that there was a fruitful site of renewing the critical theory school of activism by picking up postmodern theory. So you can see it one way or you can see it the other way, that critical theory picked up postmodern tools, or that postmodernism morphed into a more critical theory mindset. But either way, the observation that brought the two concepts together into a completely new form that we in cynical theories call applied postmodernism, but it is actually the birthplace of wokeism, was that you have to have an awful lot of privilege to deconstruct a site of systemic oppression. Somebody who experiences, who has the lived experience, the lived reality of systemic oppression cannot deconstruct that. You must be privileged to deconstruct that.
But I believe you came here because you agree that we owe the black community an apology. For me as a white man, I'm going to own that. We ask for forgiveness from our black brothers and sisters for years and years of racism, of systematic racism, of bigotry, of hate. On behalf of the white race and the brown race, we stand in solidarity, God. We take a knee and salute to them. We honor them.
I think we're live. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Okay, yes, I can see all chats. And believe me, have celebrities ended racism with their social media activism? I didn't think it was possible. Right, who have we got next?
I think probably James Corden.
James Corden. Right.
You remember his
Yeah. He posted like an 8-minute, well, someone posted this 8-minute ramble. I'm going to start at about 2 minutes in because he spends the first couple of minutes just basically saying, oh, I'm white and therefore I shouldn't talk about this. So,
this is our problem to solve. How can the black community dismantle a problem that they didn't create?
Right. Already I'm pissed off. This is our problem to solve. The black community can't do it. It's okay, James. That sounds a lot like the white man's burden. Like, that sounds a lot like the noble white man spreading civilization around the planet and raising up the benighted people of color, as you might call them, around the world. I don't think that we actually should be carrying the white man's burden anymore, James. I'm sorry. I'm just really progressive like that.
This weekend we saw many peaceful protesters demanding an end to the murder of black Americans.
He's not going to acknowledge the riots, is he?
Of police officers who have killed, demanding votes for change, demanding justice. And we saw anger. And of course people are angry. Black Americans have spent hundreds of years desperately making the case for their own humanity and have been relentlessly and often brutally silenced.
Okay, fuck's sake. So he's not going to acknowledge that 17 people have been killed by these riots, is he?
Oh, why would he?
And I love the black people have spent hundreds of years. No black person has spent hundreds of years doing anything, James. Sorry to nitpick. Fucking.
And so here we are. Protests across America. These protests, they have to result in change. Because when athletes took a knee peacefully at a football game, the vice president stood up and walked out of that stadium rather than see that protest. Now a policeman takes a knee to a man's neck and our leadership hide in a bunker rather than see this protest.
There is there is something deeply ironic about the taking a knee thing after the police officers used the knee to kill George Floyd. I mean, it seems like the kind of prank that 4chan would pull. Say, you know, George Floyd was killed with this police officer with the knee on his neck, so we all need to take a knee. It's like, I don't like the optics of this.
No, I can imagine someone can turn that into a prank now.
Yeah, I think it looks really bad. But the worst part about it for me is the whole idea of taking a knee, bending the knee, is an act of submission to someone else. And if that's what's being demanded, my answer is no, never bend the knee, ever. In fact, the very act of asking someone to bend the knee to you is, in my opinion, a massive moral affront to that person's agency and independence as their own person. It seems to imply that, in fact, they should be your vassal and they should do as you say. And I really can't stand that. So never bend the knee, ever. You only ever apologize unless you think you've done something wrong. And the cringy hordes of Californian white people who are like, oh, I'm bending knee to the black people. You are awful, and you are setting race relations back, in my opinion. Let's have a listen to what was it Logan Paul has to say about this now. This has had 14 million views, this video.
Listen closely. One of my biggest learnings from all of this, and I'm embarrassed that it's taken me 25 years to realize this. It is not enough to be not racist. You have to be anti-racist.
Yes.
Condemn those who feign superiority because of the color of their skin. Friends, hold friends accountable. Hold your family accountable. Hold yourself accountable. And most importantly, we must hold our authorities accountable. Police officers, politicians, policymakers. As Killer Mike said, bully the politicians at the voting booth. Make your voice heard.
Oh, God, stop. Jesus Christ. Right. How many people have been killed in these riots so far?
17 and counting.
17 people. That's just brilliant.
Sadly, 2 of them were black police officers. 1 killed by looters, 1 domestic terrorist killed him, as I understand.
Yeah.
So more black lives have been killed in these protests than what we are protesting.
Well, there we go. Right, let's carry on with Logan Paul. He's only got a minute left.
Attend a
Yeah, I've
protest.
just seen Voltaire's
Speak
ghost,
up
but is
against
he a
injustice.
hostage?
Sorry?
The Voltaire's ghost has put in the chat, is he a hostage? I mean,
Logan Paul?
yeah.
Yeah, he's ideologically possessed. He's not thinking anymore. He's pounding his fist. Now, let me just finish this.
If you're white, if you look like me, use your privilege. And for those who do not think white privilege exists, you are fucking blind. You are delusional, and you are part of the problem. I can count on 0 hands the amount of times that I have feared for my life at a routine traffic stop. That has never happened. Half of the reason I'm able to get away with some of my hooligan shit I do in my vlogs is because I'm a white kid. I'm confident that I do not have to fear for my life should the cops show up. Acknowledge and weaponize your privilege. I believe we're going to a protest today. You can bet your fucking ass I'll be in the front line. Knowing all this about America, its racially charged background, its inability to truly treat humans as equals, even after 244 years since its inception, we must now work towards finding the solution. And if you are an influencer or a celebrity friend of mine, I hope you are using your platform to continue to spread the message of solidarity and unity. I do not have all the answers, but I know we must now reverse engineer the system as a collective. We must open our eyes and realize that there is only one race, and that is the human race. On behalf of Breonna Taylor, we must change. On behalf of Ahmaud Arbery, we must advance. And on behalf of George Floyd and the hundreds of others who have been unjustly murdered in this country, we must evolve.
Wow. Okay, I mean, like Chris Hicks has said, he sounds like the Communist Party vanguard during Mao's Cultural Revolution. And that's exactly how he sounds to me. He totally subverted by communism. We need to deconstruct the system. I think that the media narrative has been so persistent and so drilled down to a fine art for the people who are proposing it that it doesn't really matter what you say to those people at that point. I think that at that point, they are just not listening. And if you say anything that doubts any aspect of their worldview, then you are outside of the cult and you have been identified as the villain. Because I think this is a cult. I mean, this is definitely cult behavior. Demonize outsiders, worship your internal goal and your leaders. And never question the orthodoxy. Never look at anything else.
Where's the evidence of racial element in this case? Like, it's a clear case of police brutality, but I'm unaware of any evidence yet about race.
No.
And yet, even just asking that question to certain people will get them very riled up.
And the fact that it happened, it was a white guy to a black guy. That's all. That's all that matters.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's all the evidence you need.
I used to be racist like you, then I took a social justice to the knee. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing how you can be racist one day and you didn't even realize, and then suddenly all you have to do is say, you know what, white people are the problem, and then you're an anti-racist. The most frustrating part of the Black Lives Matter zeitgeist right now for me is that for years I've been told that I'm not allowed an opinion on racism because I'm white. Suddenly now these same ideologues are demanding our aid and in some cases our submission. Found a definition of white privilege, which is unearned blame. The idea that American police are hunting down blacks is a lie perpetuated by the media, selectively highlighting interracial incidents where blacks are the victims. I'm not saying police brutality doesn't exist. I'm saying the race narrative is a lie. Bing. Got it. That's exactly it.